Hello, I'm retired Battalion Chief Larry Cockman from the Greensboro, North Carolina Fire Department History Book Committee. We're here today at the Greensboro Historical Museum. I'm standing in front of the General Green, the first steam pumper, or as they called it back then, a steamer. Today, December 9th, 2019, we are starting a new tradition of recording and preserving the heritage and culture of our retirees. Our retirees have contributed so much to the success of our great fire department. Their stories retire with them and are sometimes gone forever when they pass away. They will share their emergency calls that will always be a part of their memories forever. So sit back and listen as they carry us through their journey in the Greensboro Fire Department.
Okay, my name is Paul Brooks. I'm 65 years old. I'll be 66 in June. I was an assistant fire chief when I retired and over the planning and technology things in the department. Retired with just a couple months short of 35 years service. I came on in 1974 and retired in 2008. Yes, I am from Greensboro. I grew up in Greensboro out on North Church Street and went to school at Northeast High School, senior high, where a lot of the folks on our department came from during that time. I found out about relationships after I came on. Danny Waller, who retired as a battalion chief, is a cousin-in-law of mine, my wife's first cousin. I knew Danny was on the fire department, but Danny and I didn't know each other very well then, and that didn't play a role in me coming on. Later though, Danny and I became good friends and talked a lot, spent a lot of time together. Farther back, I had another like uncle by marriage, twice removed, R.V. Thornberry, who was a very prominent member of the fire department back in the 50s. But he left the fire department and went into chaplaincy with the U.S. Navy, and then he retired there and pastored churches in Greensboro. When I joined the fire department, I was just 19 years old. Actually, I was 18 when I started looking. Kathy and I were living in Myrtle Beach, and we found out that she was pregnant with our first son, Jamie. And we knew, now Myrtle Beach in 1973 and 74 is not Myrtle Beach today. It died after Labor Day. The hospital pretty much shut down. We knew, my wife knew, she was not having a baby in Myrtle Beach, so we were coming home. So I thought this is an opportunity to do something different. I was working in the construction field, and I started looking, and firefighters had made an impression on me when I was a young boy, and I thought, well, I might try to apply for that. And the timing was perfect, and they just opened a couple stations, and I had a good opportunity and was hired in '74. Yeah, well, the process for hiring at that time, Chief Powell was the first deputy chief, that was the title at the time, and he handled all the hiring. There was a bit of a physical, just doing a few exercises for him or for the guys out at the training center. Chief Powell handled it most. It was interviews with him. He did most of the narrowing down. There was a background investigation, and Chief Kent actually did my background investigation, I found out later. So it wasn't nearly the process that it is now. They interviewed my wife in the hiring process, but we were living in Myrtle Beach at the time, so it was kind of hard to catch her. It was a telephone interview. They did go in my neighborhood and walked around in the neighborhood. Chief Kent actually walked around the neighborhood, went to the little curb market across the street from my house, went to neighbors' houses, knocked on the door and asked if they knew me. So it was pretty interesting. Well, the questions that they asked my wife dealt mostly with, did she clearly understand, you know, that I would be doing shift work if I was hired and would be away from home and that sort of thing. My starting salary, I believe, my memory, is $586 a month, and right at graduation of our recruit class, it went up to, it was either $617 or $627. Yes, I was in the 25th recruit class. My training officers was Bill Osborne and Reese Kent. We had 12 people that started in our recruit class. 10 made it to graduation. One did not make it through probation, so 9 of us made it through probation. 6 of us made it to retirement. My memories of recruit training is just that it was a wonderful time. Great experiences, a great group. They brought us on kind of piecemeal, a couple here, a couple there. We were actually the second class in 2. There was a big class that had been hired and graduated the fall before, and then we were the second class kind of filling out spots. So the first ones, there were actually a couple in my class that were working in stations that had been hired earlier than those of us that came in January and February. We kind of, like I say, came in a couple at a time. Ricky Willits and I started just 1 week apart. The time before the class started, we did all the stuff that all the people during that time had to do. We were out pulling the vines off the fence. We were cleaning the old rabbits and stuff that had fell into the pit, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So that was good. You got to know your classmates before class started. Oh yeah, and, certainly I remember my best friend, Ricky Willits. Ricky and I met. I was doing all of the process from the distance. I'd have to drive up from Myrtle Beach to Greensboro. And Ricky and I met one morning when we were doing all the medical evaluations. We met in Chief Powell's office. Ricky had just got out of the Navy. He was from Burlington. He drove over. So Chief Powell had us go together. I knew Greensboro, so I knew where we were going. Ricky drove his 66 Chevelle, so that was quite a charge. But Ricky was my best friend. Others that, and we were friends on the fire department, outside the fire department. We're in business together. We did all kind of stuff together for years and years, and are still very good friends. Randy Parrish, Ray Cook, Doug Reed, these were all guys in our class. Andy McFarland. Mike Henson was in my recruit class. Mike had been in the previous class and broke his leg and had to wait and got recycled. He was one of the guys that was working out in stations at the time. I don't remember funny stories from the training days. We had a lot of fun. We did a lot of stuff together outside of the classroom and the drill ground. So there was the normal pranks that everybody played. One of the guys had a motorcycle. He brought it one day and we were riding it around on the drill ground. Ricky Willits had a hot rod. He had a 66 Chevelle and he had to go to a doctor's appointment or something one morning, and he pulled out in front of the training center and burned the tires all the way down past the drill ground. So Chief Kent was waiting on him when he got back. So that was kind of funny. But most of the things I remember is just the fun stuff, but also losing some. We lost 2 during the class. One that really made an impression on me. We had, the day before, we had been working on the tower. We had started sliding rope and we were doing all of that. We'd not done the palm pier yet, but we had climbed the aerial ladder. If you remember, they used to bring an aerial ladder out and have you climb up, hook in the belt and lean back, you know, confidence builder is what they called it. Well, one of the guys struggled with the heights, and the next morning when we all came in, his gear was sitting on the floor in the hallway. His boots and quick hitch and coat and helmet and all that was sitting, and he was gone. He quit that morning. He wasn't going to do the Palm Pier. The heights got him. We had another that was let go because of academics. So seeing them leave, that bothered you. It made an impression. Yes. Now I did feel that we were doing something special, or we were going to be part of something special, and you got that feeling during recruit training. The people that you met that were already on the department that came by, spoke, that you met out in the garage, our training officers and the stories that they would tell in downtime, you knew you had joined something that was special. You might not know exactly how special or what was special about it, but you did. I did not feel that. I didn't feel it like a calling when I applied. It was a good way to get back to Greensboro and get my family back to Greensboro. But I came to believe it's like a calling. And Frank Shaw, our first paid fire chief, wrote about this, about the occupation of a firefighter as being a calling, just like a pastor or a doctor. And he's right, and you get that feeling. You know, I knew I was meant to be there. That was meant for me. My first station assignment was Station 7 on Engine 7. It was a single company station at the time. My captain was Paul Brown, who was an amazing guy. A great person for somebody like me to start out with. He enjoyed being with the people, so he joined in all our activities. I thought Paul was 30 years old. He was like 54, but he could run all the young guys into the ground. He was so physically fit. But I had a crew. The crew that I was assigned to was an amazing crew. Worked great as a team, but also had a lot of competitiveness about them. My driver was Kyle Stewart. Now, he was a great technician. A lot of stories about Kyle on the fire department probably, but Kyle was a great technician, great driver, great leader, informal leader back in the bedroom. There was no doubt that Kyle was our company informal leader. Danny Nelson was the second driver, and Danny could do anything. Mechanical, technical, he could do it all. Probably the most competitive person on our crew was Danny Shoemate. He was a firefighter. And he was awesome, very good at what he did, but that was the group that I went to work with. We got out of training at about 4:30 that evening, and then I had to go to Station 7 at 6 o'clock and report for duty. It was C shift was my shift. And now, while we were still a single company station, about 6 months later, Bill Williams joined us when his class graduated, and we were all together for about 6 more months or something like that. And then when they put the new Truck 4 in service, it came to Station 7, and we all stayed together on the same shift, but we split up on the two companies. Pranks were a big part of the culture, especially when I first came on the fire department. I remember a few, but pranks were every day. It was part of the culture, part of the life. You were the butt of a prank, or you were part of doing one. Lots of the pranks involved water, dumping water, spraying water. Water was involved in a lot of it. But I drove a old 64 Chevy 2 that was two-tone simply because I had to replace the trunk and it wasn't the same color as the rest of it. It was a wore-out, ragged-looking car. And we had a dumpster at our station where people brought newspapers for recycling. And I messed up and parked my car beside the dumpster. So the guys, after we went to bed or something, they all snuck out there. and filled my car with newspaper. And I mean filled it to where I could not get in, as if people had come and thought my car was the dumpster. So, you know, there was always stuff like that going on. The union was the end of the original union, the first union that we had in Greensboro, and I was a member. I joined not long after coming to Station 7. I joined because the guys at the station were in it, but also because of some other people that I responded with. Fred Lawrence, he was a captain, I think at Station 3 at that time. Fred was the union president. Frank Jones out at Station 14 during that time on my shift. He had been very heavy in union leadership. So I joined the union and immediately became editor of the union's newsletter called The Hose Line. And did that for a couple years, and then, you know, that union disbanded, you know. Yeah, in all the stations that I worked at, we all cooked, we all ate together. Station 7 is a single company station, and then a 2-company station with a battalion chief. My first battalion chief was Mick Noonan, and he was very particular about the meals. They had to be at exactly the right time. I had J.E. McCarter as a captain for a while on Truck 4 at Station 7. So in addition to the times and those sorts of things, you always set a bottle of Pepsi and an onion beside J.E. McCarter's plate. The thing about the meals, it wasn't the meal, although there was great cooking. Think of Southern family style cooking. That's what it was. I learned to cook in a firehouse. I knew how to make sandwiches, about it. But the big thing about the meals was the cultural impact and influence. It was the group, it was the team, it was the conversation, and people would come by around mealtime and sit in and join. We invite them to join us. You know, police officers. We actually had a milkman that did deliveries to the station at the time. He would come and eat with us. So the meals were a big deal culturally and for the group and the team. My favorite dish that I cooked was stew beef, and then you'd have greens or green beans, mashed potatoes. Of course, there's always the firehouse meal, the pinto beans, broiled spam, mac and cheese, slaw, Saturday hot dogs. You know, we all had the same customs. For meals, our meals probably cost $2 a day a piece for the whole thing, and we supported a divvy that bought all the staple stuff. And I think when I went there, and it stayed that way for a long time, like $1.50, and then it went to $3 per payday for our divvy. The most I ever paid, I ended up, well, the biggest station I worked at with the people was Station 5, and our divvy over there was like $5 a payday. Culture's changed, people have changed. There's been generational changes in the fire service since I came on and then served through. I'm still involved with fire departments though through my other work, and I can see the changes over time. And in all honesty, the method has changed, but what's happening is basically the same. Where they may have cooked every meal and eaten every meal together, now they go out for meals. We weren't allowed to do that, but they still go as a unit and a group, and you see them doing that. But I still see value in preparing the meal. A lot of personalities came out in meal prep, meal choice, menu choice. The rules that you had, the rules you had to follow about meals and cooking to satisfy the group. The greatest value to me was the team and the culture. You learn the real history of your fire department and your company sitting around the meal tables. You learn the backgrounds of people and where they came from and what they did sitting around the table. Having the meal was a way of getting to know people, interacting with people, and building those relationships. So I would highly encourage that to people today. Even if you go out most meals or something, or if people bring their own, make sure you have a couple meals a week with your shifts to sit down as a group and enjoy it together. In today's fire service, most fire stations have individual sleeping areas, cubicles, partitioned off areas. Most modern fire stations even have different rooms. Everybody has their own room. And there's a lot of value in that. Again, that's, I think, generational, cultural. Today, people might prefer that. The privacy, the time alone, it's probably valuable to them. But when I came through, we didn't have individual sleeping quarters. The only people that slept separate were the officers. And if there was more than one officer, they shared a room together. But I grew up as a young firefighter in the dorm or in the kitchen. And in the dorm, we're all together, we're all 8 or 9 beds in one room, sharing that together. And there again, you get to know people, you have conversations with people. My best dorm times with the bigger groups was Station 7. We had a little routine at night at Station 7 when the lights was out. Everybody would still be talking, you couldn't see anybody, and that's when a lot of pranks went on too. But we did the Waltons thing, good night so-and-so, good night. Everybody would say good night to each other at night. And then Station 5, we had a lot of good times at Station 5. We had a big dorm with a lot of people in it, and you really got close to people through those kind of experiences together. As I've seen the daily life evolve in Greensboro, but mostly in other departments now. I see departments across the country, around the world. It's still true, firehouses are firehouses. Whether you go to a firehouse in Fargo, North Dakota, or Greensboro, North Carolina, firehouse is a firehouse. Much of the same things go on. I've seen the same thing, whether it's Sicily, Italy, or wherever it might be. I think the kinds of things may have changed, but I still believe they're doing that bonding. I don't see them sharing as much together as we did when we were young, because we had so many things that made you bond together. But I remember watching the kids grow up and the families change and evolve and being involved in that. That was a real big deal at the time. Now, they may still do that sort of thing, do things together as groups off duty. I don't see it as much, and if they're not, I think they're missing out on a lot, especially the value of the families. Families come to the fire station, you see them, you see their kids, you follow their kids after. You may not work together anymore, but you're still family and friends, and you're following. Well, families came to the station most on Sundays. Sunday was the big family day. I don't spend a lot of time in Greensboro firehouses today. For the most part, most of the people don't know who you are. I've been gone 11 years. But I think it does have value for retirees like me and all my friends to come back and visit stations, and for the younger folks to engage in conversation. I mentioned earlier, I learned more about the history of my fire department sitting around the dinner table. Hearing the war stories and in the dorm rooms, hearing the war stories and things. Younger people in the department today, if they engaged retirees, they could learn more about their department, learn more about the culture, the changes, and also the people. I'll tell you this, one of the things that meant the most to me especially in my younger years, was learning about the people that came before me and the people I was working with. Things that weren't related to the fire department. My captain, Paul Brown, was an awesome fire captain. But as a young man, he was a machine gunner on a landing craft on D-Day. That's pretty awesome. Elwood Hare, battalion chief, flew in bombers as part of the crew and got shot down. A.C. Farmer, who was an awesome captain, very strict but very personable. He was a young Marine on Iwo Jima and saw the flag on Iwo Jima being raised. Started to shoot them because they didn't know who it was. So you learn these things about people, and then people I've worked with, like Larry Coble, learning about him and his family. Two people that impressed me a lot, talking about changes, the racial contact and changes, gender changes as people entered the fire department. I learned most about people different from me, from Larry Coble and Ray Flowers. I got to travel with both of them a lot, and hearing their experiences weren't mine. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize our experiences were so different until we got to spend time together, and I consider both great friends. Oh, absolutely. When I went to Station 7, I showed up at 6 o'clock, went through the evening and morning. My first shift ended at 8 o'clock the next morning, did not have a call. Then I came back my second shift. My first call was a car fire on Bessemer Avenue in an auto repair shop, and in fact it was inside the building. We had to force the sliding doors open to get to the car. My first four calls were car fires, and then my fifth call was the Revolution Meal. And the first thing they did with the rookies was send you underground down into the water to get over underneath the mill into all the land. So those were my first 5 calls. First 4 were car fires, and then the mill fire. My best friend Ricky Willits also went to Station 7. He reported and relieved me that first morning at 8 o'clock. On his first day, they had 4 working apartment fires. And Clarence Hillier was his captain. And by the end of the day, they were sending Ricky up the ladder and sending him in through a window, taking the hose line with him. And me and Ricky both talked about that and thought, man, is this how it's going to be like every day? And what have we got ourselves into? I do not remember my first medical call. We were not routinely running medical calls when I joined the fire department, and through my first few station assignments, first 2 station assignments, we didn't do a lot of medical. My second station was Station 3. I went there because the squads were being put in service, and that's when we started getting into the medical mission. I was a driver on Engine 6 and got transferred to go join Squad 1, and my shift was Larry Coble and Joey McIntyre. And the first call I went on, I was riding with both of them, kind of observing, learning. You know, they were teaching me the ropes. And it was a wreck, I want to say off Battleground Avenue somewhere, but we had a guy that was killed and another guy that had lost a leg and things. It was pretty ugly. But I rode the squad for a number of years, and we rode. As a firefighter, you see a lot of tragedy, and you see death, and you have to deal with that. And I've dealt with death of people we were responding to help and to serve, and I've also been on, I was close to a firefighter, your brother, that died on the job, and then I was actually on a training fire where Jackie Beard died from cardiac. And it's different. You know how we initially dealt with it. We didn't have classes that told you how to talk about things, get your feelings out and that sort of thing. We would come back to the station and joke about it. We punched another ticket today. If we went on a cardiac and the person didn't make it, we punched another ticket today. Guys would come back talking about painting skulls and crossbones on the doors or stuff like that. You talked about it, but you got into the talking by joking. You might talk seriously back in the dorm room about it or the locker room. Even something like that, you didn't talk much around the table. You heard the stories of the big events. By the time I was on the call where Jackie Beard died, or the event, things had changed a little bit. We'd been trained a little bit more. And there was follow-up, there was counseling made available for the people that were on the scene. I was actually the safety officer for the department at the time that happened. And I was a good friend of Jack, and he was very good to my youngest son, Jeremy. And that hit pretty hard. That was pretty tough. The day of 9/11, I was actually teaching an officer development program at a retreat out in Brown Summit for the State Fire Chiefs Association. And all the guys' pagers, we carried pagers back then, all our pagers started going off talking about news flashes of an incident in New York. And it took a while to figure out. The first one was a plane flew into a building, and then a little bit later you saw a second plane had flown into a building, and then you start thinking, something's funny here, and then the crash of the plane in Pennsylvania. So that whole group, you know, there's about 30 or 40 people out there, all fire people, all fire officers, and they're all getting antsy because, you know, the first thing that you want is you want to be there. You want to be involved. But then you start realizing we got the news flash because we had no TV or radio where we were at. It was so far out, there was no reception. No cable TV at the time. Through the pagers, we heard the news about the first and then the second building collapse. And one of the guys even made a comment and said, you know how New York's inspected, there were probably 300 or 400 people in those buildings, and he was pretty close. 343 was the number. I think it made a big impression on us. For a period of time, it actually brought attention to us that we needed, because people started realizing it doesn't matter whether it's your house or your child choking or a plane hits the World Trade Center. The first responders are your fire service. They're the ones that are going in and dealing with it. It's not the military, you know, it's your local fire service are going to be the first ones in. So we got a lot of attention, a lot of effort to meet needs initially. We got a lot of goodwill. Goodwill probably stuck with us longer than politicians willing to spend money. That didn't happen in the long term. Now for us, I think what it did, it dealt with our image, you know. So the picture of George Bush standing with the megaphone on the pile of rubble talking to the group, who was he talking to and who was standing behind him? Beside him, it was firefighters. Had his arm around a retired New York firefighter that came out to work that event and help find their fallen brothers and sisters. So, you know, I think we went through a lot of stuff. Our visibility rose in communities. Probably the downside for us, that's when the hero mentality kind of began. We were seen as heroes at the time, and then we started believing we're heroes, and we started acting differently. So I think maybe that's a little bit of a downside for us. But it certainly makes you aware that you have a legacy. What's it going to be? Because this could happen to you. And we're certainly more aware. Young firefighters today are probably even more aware than we were that you go to work today, there's no guarantee you can come back home.
Change things.
I was assigned at the training division in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. Started there as a captain and ended up battalion chief, but I was acting training supervisor because the assistant chief had moved over into admin when Frank Jones became fire chief. But I think I trained 5 recruit classes, but it was during a period of tremendous growth for us in the fire department. So our classes were huge compared to what they used to be. We were running 30, 35 people at a time through recruit classes, and frequently they were back to back. We were doing hiring processes for one while we're still training another, you know, that sort of thing. Events that changed the direction for the department that training was very involved in, I think was the Davie Street fire. That's the biggest event that resulted in change in operation. Before then, we didn't train incident commanders. We did very little officer training. After that, we saw the need for that, and that's when Greensboro Fire Department adopted Brunacini's incident command system. We implemented that system. We did all kind of simulations for that fire and other fires, and I think it made a significant change in changing our training directives and roles, and certainly changed our operations tremendously. I have been extremely fortunate in my career that I've worked with and for some great people. So rather than having a single mentor, I have felt like I was mentored by people around me all through my career. My first captain, it couldn't have been a better captain for me and what I needed at the time, and making me focus. And the crew that I worked with was competitive and driven, and that helped me. Certainly the people I worked with everywhere I went challenge you, mentor you. But things outside of it, like A.C. Farmer taught me how to save. He was a great officer, a great fire officer. Those of us that worked for him together probably were a little aggravated with him sometimes, because he was so particular about the routine and the rules and that sort of thing. And we probably complained about that more than we needed to, but he was a great teacher. I learned to save because of him. That was something that he tried to get all of his people to do, realizing that there is a world outside the fire department, and someday you're going to have to retire to it, or you're going to be ready for that. But I also saw him as a great mentor, being the stickler, following the rules, being very technically precise. But I saw him one night actually walk in the battalion chief's room and pull a letter out of the typewriter that the battalion chief was typing up to reprimand one of the guys on AC's company, just to make him talk to him about that person and all the things that person did and brought to the team. And he probably saved that firefighter's job, who later went on and became a captain and influential and a union leader, of course. It's a lot of people that I worked with were mentors. I've had great mentors outside of Greensboro Fire Department, and some of them were fire service mentors, some of them were just awesome life mentors, but I wouldn't have met if it hadn't been for the fire department. I did not work in a station with a female when I was on a fire company, but I was on Engine 3 when the first female class did their first live burn, and we went out and helped them do that, and that was very interesting. Of course, you had Kay Pierman, Deanne, Anita Strong, some of the others involved in that class that made careers out of it. But I worked with females in my other roles and positions quite a bit. I learned a lot about females in the fire service, and again, their experiences and their experiences were not mine. And some of those lessons were kind of hard lessons that I learned that came later. I would do everything all over again. I would come in the fire service. Like I said, once I got in there, I realized that's where I was supposed to be. It just felt like a complete, total natural fit, and I felt like I was achieving something, helping people, helping the community, all of that sort of stuff. So I would do it all again. In my career, Chief Nugent might not appreciate this because it could impact people thinking about coming in and working for him and the jobs he needs. But I might rethink whether I would go down that admin path compared to staying in operations. I felt like I had a good reputation as a good firefighter in operations, good company officer, coming along, young up-and-comer, and then went to training. Training was probably the greatest place I ever was at. My two favorite stations were 7 and 5 and the assignments there. My greatest assignment was in training, influencing the young folks, influencing the department, even things like the kind of equipment that we put out on the fire trucks. Training did back then. But the other stuff, the admin stuff, I might not. Now, I felt like my greatest contributions to the department were probably in my administrative roles, and specifically in planning and growth and that sort of thing. But it separates you from the people that you once were very close to, and separates you from the younger firefighters and stuff out there too. So. Well, changing roles for firefighters over the years, certainly things have progressed, things have changed. I think we in the fire service reflect a lot of what's going on in society, so there's been a lot of cultural changes, especially today. Firefighters, young firefighters, when I came on, it was kind of like your grandparents used to tell you, kid's supposed to be seen, not heard. You're supposed to sit there and do what you're told and that sort of thing. Now, firefighters from their first day, I think, speak up, challenge, are challenged, and contribute. Again, I see that their role may not be quite as close to the community as it one time has been. And some of it may be just changing society in general, but also the expectations. I think a lot of expectations of firefighters have changed. So, but if you ask any retired firefighter that from any era, they're going to say that. You know, it's like we all walked to school uphill barefoot in the snow, both ways. You know, so, you know, it's always was better back in the day. Today's fire service, it's much more technical. When I came in the fire service, probably the job of a tailboard firefighter was much more labor oriented. And today it's much more technically oriented. I think the culture has went through a shift though, because when I came on and those in my era, we were in the first wave of changes becoming more technical firefighters, more than just pulling hose, doing the rescue stuff, doing more technical things. And the focus on firefighters at the time, we were trying to change the image in the public from we were just laborers to we were technicians. So we wore the full uniforms and all that kind of stuff. And we were the first during that time to go get education. Education started becoming more and more important. I actually think I've seen a reversal of that. The technical knowledge requirements gone even higher, especially in the area of rescues and things like that, and the type of equipment that you're using. But the image has gone back to more of a labor-oriented, the hero kind of image. So we have the handlebar mustaches and the, you know, those sorts of things, and not so much wearing the uniform to look like a technical professional, but more the look of labor. And I'm not saying anything against labor there. I'm just saying there's been a change in shift. And that's how we're seeing ourselves. Well, that's also how the community's seeing us. So sometimes if you're having problems getting the funding that you need and things like that, think about how you're portraying yourself. I've thought a lot about who has influenced me probably the most off the job. And I'm actually going to have to give you two answers. My boys first. My oldest son, which Chief Cockman, you know, went to school with your boys, is quite a driven guy, but he's very thoughtful, very successful in what he's done, and especially now in business. And we talk about business a lot, and the roles have changed. I'm learning from him now, where he used to ask me for advice, I'm going to him asking for advice. People that knew my younger son, Jeremy, know the challenges that he had and that he lived through. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about priorities and how to react in situations, and what to be grateful for and thankful for, and what's important in life. Outside of my boys, the biggest mentor for me was another firefighter, but not like you'd think. It was a man named Michael Worthington. Mike Worthington grew up in eastern North Carolina, in Greenville, Greene County, down that way, around Greenville. He was from the town of Whiteville. His dad was the volunteer fire chief and ran the local meat market and a little, what you'd call a grocery store back in the day. So Mike, as a young man, was a volunteer in the fire department. And when he was 15 and 16 years old, alarms would come in from the fire department. He'd run the fire. He was actually the driver and operator at 15 to 16 years old. He went to East Carolina, but after he was there in his second year, his family, a small community, everybody knew each other, the county manager came to him and asked him if he'd take the job as the county fire chief, county fire marshal. So he left school and went and did that back in the fire service. And he did amazing things. He was tasked with getting all the fire departments certified, which they had not been. The biggest thing, and getting a training program in place, and then the biggest thing was getting a communication system in a county. They didn't have radios, no way to communicate in the county. So he built a communication system countywide. Bought Motorola, got involved with Motorola, left Greenville or Whiteville and went to work with Motorola. Well, he became an executive. Now this is a small time young fire chief in rural eastern North Carolina. Became senior vice president of Motorola, living out of Schaumburg, Illinois, St. Charles, Illinois. Senior vice president in charge of global communications and marketing. His budget had a B in it, $1 billion, was over $1 billion. He had lived all around the world, but he never forgot where he came from, little Whiteville, North Carolina, in eastern North Carolina. And he was the treasurer on my board of directors when I took over the Center for Public Safety Excellence. And I learned so much from him about life, about fire service and loving the fire service and how you can contribute, but just how to live as a person. He owned his own fire truck. He bought his own fire truck. Trying to think of what you want people to remember you as is a very hard question, especially for somebody like me that may not have went down the traditional path, you know. I would like for them to remember me as somebody good to work with, that they could trust and stand behind them wherever they was at. I'm proud of my legacy, but most people will never know Paul Brooks's legacy. It's just rolled up into the rest of the fire department and the planning, the stations and all that kind of stuff. You know, just, you don't lose track. You're acutely aware of it.
Right.
Everybody else separates you out from that.
Right.
And that's kind of what I felt from that. Loved my boys, and that life was all about the boys and family. And that's how it's come back full circle. You know, mine and Kathy's life now focuses around our son Jamie and our grandkids. A lot of it about telling them the stories. We constantly tell them stories about their Uncle Jeremy because he's not with us anymore and we don't want them to forget him. So I want them to remember me though, they do think. Kathy and I are the cool grandparents. We're the fun ones. And we do fun stuff, and I've tried to teach them always look for the adventure in life. So I've done crazy stuff on my own. I've done crazy stuff with them, and still doing it, and trying to video as much of it as I can when we do. Like my grandson and I did that slingshot thing in Myrtle Beach where they shoot you up in the air, and he almost passed out. So things like that are fun, and doing stuff like that. If they remember me as living life like it's a big adventure and loving the family, that's the big things.
We hope you enjoyed watching these documentaries. It was our goal to share and preserve the memories of our retired Greensboro firefighters. It is our desire that these documentaries will inspire future generations to continue the brotherhood, sisterhood, and camaraderie while always striving for excellence in their careers. While fire apparatus, equipment, and technology have improved, several things will always remain the same. The courage and bravery it takes to mitigate natural and man-made disasters will always be a part of the job. Although our retirees are no longer a physical part of the GFD world, a giant piece of each retiree's memories have been shared with you today. These memories will be in their hearts and minds forever. A special thank you goes out to Captain Harold Haney for his many long hours of recording and editing. Thank you, Harold. A job well done.